Hello, thank you so much for being with us today for the After Lunch Special. This is Centers for Spiritual Living and Science of Mind magazine's weekly interview series, which offers nourishment for your mind and your soul. And we have different interviews every week. I know we're just getting started right now, so I'm just going to talk a little bit while people join us. I'm your host for today. My name is Holli Sharp, and I gratefully serve as the editor and creative director for your beloved Science of Mind magazine. So thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to be with us. Again, this is the After Lunch Special brought to you by Centers for Spiritual Living and Science of Mind magazine. And if you didn't hear me before, my name is Holli Sharp, and I am the editor and creative director for Guide for Spiritual Living, Science of Mind magazine. And today we have a very special guest, somebody who's near and dear to my heart and has been a mentor to me since I began on staff more than 6 years ago. Today, sitting with me is Reverend Dr. Jesse Jennings. Jesse is the author of the magazine's popular question and answer column, and he also serves as a contributing editor to the magazine. And Jesse is a prolific author. He has several books, including The Essential Ernest Holmes. And I dare say he is a religious science archive, a walking, talking religious science archive. So thanks for being with me today, Jesse. It's always great to see you and be with you.
Thank you. It's a joy and an honor to be here. Not necessarily.
Thank you.
It's more of an honor than a joy.
And another great aspect of Jesse is he has quite a sense of humor. So I'm hoping today our audience can get a real sense of who you are and what you bring, not only to the magazine, but to everything you touch. And so, you know, the October magazine, traditionally, you are the author of the daily guides, but you curate selections of Dr. Ernest Holmes. And so since we're starting the month of October with those powerful daily guides, I just want to ask you about the process for writing the daily guides and finding the selections from Dr. Holmes. There's so many. How do you do that?
It's 7 years now, I think I'm doing this. In the first year, I decided to get cute, and I went to a lot of more arcane material of his. There's a little book called Values that's a dialogue between Holmes and the actor Milton Sills. And you spend enough time on eBay, you can find these things. And so I had that, and I took a piece out of there. And but that only worked for the first year or two, because those selections are very brief, and what readers are looking for is something inspiring and useful in their day. So more recently, I've been pulling from the books that we're more familiar with. The textbook, This Thing Called You, The Art of Life, which used to be called This Thing Called Life, Words That Heal Today, and so on. Also the Ernest Holmes papers, the 3 collections of his transcribed class notes, class talks. The tricky part is to take stuff out of context for the word count that's necessary. That's also the tricky part of the column that I write, you know, which we'll come to later. But so to take something that is it fits nicely in the space, that doesn't trail off too much, that you don't have to abbreviate too heavily, and have it be some. I try to put myself in the mindset of the person who's reading this as a daily spiritual practice, and lots of people do. They sit down at the breakfast table with the daily guides, and they have for decades, you know, and so they're looking for something in there that's going to be really practical and inspiring and comforting for the day to come. So he has plenty of that material. And what I'll probably do next year is go back and fish a couple of things out of, I don't duplicate, because he wrote hundreds of thousands of words, but I'll probably pull a couple of things out of the first year that were just really gems that haven't been seen since then in that section. And I was just thrilled. I'm thrilled to be able to do this, but I was even more thrilled at the magazine, because it had left for a time the practice of devoting the October guides to Holmes. I was thrilled that the magazine went back to doing that at all, because it is our anniversary month, and his stuff is just written in lightning.
Yes, truly. And I look forward to those gems of wisdom that you find for next October as well. And, you know, speaking of the anniversary, I think we're entering our 94th year, if I'm not mistaken, of Guide for Spiritual Living, Science of Mind magazine. And Jesse, can you refresh my memory? I believe you wrote your first set of daily guides in 1989, was it?
That is correct. Yes, I don't go all the way back to 94 years. Even Margaret Stortz doesn't go back to 94 years, but she's been writing for, what did we figure, 54, 53 or 54 years, and which
yes.
is about, yeah, it's about 20 years longer than Ernest Holmes wrote for it. Yes, in 1989, how that happened briefly was in 1989, I got a phone call from Scott Aubrey, who at the time was the editor. And he said, we're looking for new voices, and somebody gave me your name. He said, would you write 2 days of daily guides and mail them to me so that I can see that you know how to write, which I thought was fair. So I did, and he thought I could, I suppose. So in December of 89, the first set of daily guides appeared. And then by the next year, Kathy Julene had taken over as editor, and my center had a print newsletter, as we all did back in the day, and it had a little Q&A column in it that I made up, thinking what I wanted to say, and then I created a question to prompt it, you know. And she was on the mailing list, and she saw that, and she called me up, and she said, well, why don't you try, we haven't had one since I think Alberta Smith, long before, in the magazine, why don't you try a Q&A thing? So that was in 91. So it'll be 30 years next year that I have my anniversary of the column.
Well, thank you for all the years that you've given so much to our readers. I know that the Q&A is such a popular column. I look forward to reading it every month when you send it to me. And speaking of the Q&A, I know you've gotten a lot of interesting questions over the years, and we're actually working together with the team at Park Point Press on a new best of book. So it'll be the best of Jesse Jennings and the people who have sent you questions. So can you give us an idea of some of the most interesting or, you know, thought-provoking questions that you've received from readers?
There's several kinds of questions, several categories of question broadly that the questions fall into. One is the philosophical. What does Science of Mind teach about this particular thing, about the Bible, or about the will of God, or about life after death, or health issues, emotional, physical health? That's one category of question. Another category of question is personal issues that people have. I'm having a problem at work. I'm having a problem at home. What advice do you have? That's trickier to do because it's only 340 words, and typically they don't give me a lot of information, you know, so it's real general stuff. The most interesting questions I get have to do with redefining the deity in the way that we do in Science of Mind, because many times people are still in that mindset that God is separate from us. I understand that mindset. I grew up in that. The idea that God has a plan for your life, and God has expectations of you that you may or may not meet. In our teaching, of course, the divine is within you. Through spiritual practice, commune with it. And so to help steer the reader into the idea of you are your own authority. Ernest Holmes is not your authority. I'm certainly not your authority. This teaching is not. This teaching is a support mechanism. This teaching is a body of techniques to discover your own inner authority. That's fun. And I feel like I'm really doing a service to the world, to that reader and to whoever else reads it, that's where your power is within the center of the self. That's the whole meaning of metaphysics.
So speaking of metaphysics, how would you define a metaphysician? What does that term mean to you?
Well, of course, it means literally beyond the physical, and you probably know the word came from Aristotle, who didn't mean it that way. He meant that these chapters on the non-physical came after the chapters on the physical, which is kind of like, you know, pragmatic. It's sort of like the major and minor prophets in the Bible. One set had longer books, and the other had shorter. But how I think of metaphysicians is it's somebody, and I don't know where I got this expression, but I love it. It's somebody who believes in the primacy of non-physical reality. Somebody who believes and practices that everything that streams into the physical comes from a non-physical realm that is really the source of all power and all meaning. And so forms are transient and forms are malleable, but the source is absolute and everlasting. Things change, but principle doesn't. That to me is a metaphysician. And you can tell a metaphysician a lot of times by the look that's in their eye. You know, they just kind of know whether things are going well or not. They know there's something more than this. Or as I've also heard it expressed, that I'm not from here. That I'm not from here. And what that means is that I'm not just a mortal, carnal, temporal, spatial being. I'm from eternity. Or as Wayne Dyer used to say, and I don't know if he coined this, but that we are spiritual beings having a human experience rather than human beings who may or may not be having a spiritual one. So that's the metaphysician, the person who sees beyond the forms of the day into the deeper meaning, deeper possibilities. I could go on and on about it. They're metaphysicians. It has nothing to do with religion. They're metaphysicians in all religions. They're metaphysicians with no particular religion. Religion just being a story. And if you haven't heard the right story yet, then it's not your story.
Speaking of stories, when we look at the tumultuous time that we've all been through in 2020 with the coronavirus pandemic and with the civil unrest in so many areas in our nation and the impending election, what would you say to people who say, you know, why does God let bad things happen? If that question came to you, what would you say?
Well, it has come to me. And it's rough in 340 words. I may use more than that here. We don't know why all of this is happening. This is the question that anybody in leadership gets, in spiritual leadership across the world. Why is this? What is the meaning of all of this? To me, the meaning is subjective, and that's not dodging the question. I don't feel the meaning is subjective to the person who's asking it. You know, for some people, this is a time of outrage. For some people, this is a time of great stillness and deepening. For some people, it's a combination of both. Some people have checked out entirely from it all. They're basically holed up and trying to pay as little attention to it as possible. Other people are frontline workers and essential workers who are thrown out there into the midst of all of this. And everybody gets to decide their own meaning about this time. Where I personally go with it is Terry Cole Whitaker has a saying that love brings everything unlike itself up to be healed. I've used that for years, and I feel that to be true. It's like whenever we try to do the deep work, everything that impedes it gets stirred up. Catherine Ponder called this chemicalization. She says when you've treated, when you've prayed for wonderful things to happen, everything in you that's attached to anything less than that, like sediment, gets stirred up, and it comes up into consciousness, and it comes out into form. I can't say that that's what's happening for the whole world, but it's what it feels like to me, is that love is stirring things up. You know, many people, well, talking about racial unrest, many white people have felt like, well, all of that's in the past and things are so much better now, and we don't live 200 years ago. And we're seeing so clearly that really important things have not changed, and in some cases have regressed. If we want love on the planet, if we want one human family, if we want all the stuff that science of mind and similar teachings talk about, we've got to look at some things, just like the individual has to look at some things in their lives when they're sitting down and setting goals and deciding how things are going to be going forward. So for such a time as this have we come, and why it's 2020 and why it's this generation of people who are doing this, we may never know. We come to our own conclusions about it, but we know we're the ones to do it because we're here.
Yes, it's absolutely divinely ordained just by our mere existence at this time, I feel personally. And Jesse, you're doing some powerful work with your community. I understand at the end of the month, I think on October 28th, you are holding a powerful conversation, a virtual event with your community and some leaders in your community, and the topic is race. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it's called quite simply the race conversation. It's the first conversation of that type that we've had on stage and live on Facebook. We've been doing work for a while now. We've had workshops and we've had classes, we've had events with smaller groups of people. This is a man named Donald John Lewis and I who are going to sit there and we talked before on stage. We had a soul session conversation 3 or 4 years ago about spirituality generally. And it was wonderful. And you know how there are people that you can sit with and you just fall into conversation and you look up and it's 3 hours later. And not once have you talked about peripheral stuff. You know, it's all been heartfelt and deep. That's who he is to me. And I think that's who I am to him. And so we have created this event where without music or any kind of other surrounding stuff, we're going to just sit there and talk. And then try to, in the course of maybe an hour, steer the conversation into spiritual solutions, things that are within our control. Because sometimes we take situations in the world and we balloon them out of all possible help. You know, how do I heal world hunger when there are millions, billions of people out there who are facing drought or refugees or facing an uncertain tomorrow, but I can feed the people here on my block. I can feed the people here in my neighborhood. So we're going to work up really on the spot some strategies for controlling outcomes that are positive and truthful and deep and lasting. And exactly what's going to happen, I have no idea, because that's the nature of a conversation, just like this one. But it is the 28th of October at 7 p.m. Central Time on Facebook, on our Facebook page, which is Creative Life, facebook.com, creativelife.org. And we'd love to have. And later it'll go up on YouTube and some other platforms too. And you got to keep talking. We just got to keep talking about whatever it is, you know, that needs our attention, that needs our healing.
Absolutely. Jesse, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been it's like 15 minutes or so right now, but I could talk to you for hours. Your wisdom and your compassion and your practical way of being in the world and giving people tools to really navigate these challenging times. You are such a gift to so many. And I just want to remind the audience, you know, we'll promote that race conversation on Facebook, on scienceofmind.com, so that people can find you and Donald and tune in for that. So I have those details that I'll share. And also look for, Jesse has a full feature in addition to his Q&A column in the December issue, and it's beautifully titled A Snow Globe Speaks. So just a really wonderful perspective on that time of year and our place in the allness that is. And Jesse, thank you for being with me today and for giving our readers some insight into who you are. Thank you.
Thank you for being the best editor ever.
Oh man, what a way to end the conversation. Thank you, Jesse. God bless you.
And you.